Welcome to Gretna Green, a tiny village famous as the so-called marriage capital of Britain, where runaway lovers from England hopped just under a mile over the border to be married under Scottish law. Today, Gretna Green's romantic history remains its biggest draw, and on this walk around the village, we'll visit the places where young eloping couples were married, from the grand old Gretna Hall to the old smithy, a local blacksmith's for decades known as Gretna Green's most famous wedding venue. There is of course more to this village than its lengthy story of love, and so as we stroll around the historic village green, underneath the motorway, and past a variety of intriguing local landmarks, we'll delve into the story of how this tiny village on the Anglo-Scottish border was propelled to national stardom, and is now the venue for as many as 1 in 6 of all marriages in Scotland. All of that is to come over the next 17 minutes or so as we take a walk around Gretna Green. But we begin our walk in the oldest part of the village, looking towards the historic parish church, also known as Graitney Kirk. As we see it today, the church dates mostly from the 18th century, but its history stretches back much further. Some even say that this church began life as a place of worship for native Pictish peoples thousands of years ago. But Christian worship began in earnest in the 12th century, when a small church was built here, in part using stones from Hadrian's Wall, which stands just a few miles to the south of here, over the border in England. Sadly, that old church was burned down in 1736, but it was rebuilt into the form we see today, standing just next door to another intriguing local landmark. Here we find a small lodging known as Prince Charlie's Cottage, a quaint bed and breakfast which in the year 1745 is said to have once hosted none other than bonny Prince Charlie, young pretender to the British crown and leader of the Jacobite risings against King George II. At one point during the risings, Charlie's Scottish forces advanced as far south into England as Derbyshire, but it's thought that he stayed here in Gretna Green during his retreat back north, where his armies were eventually defeated by the British government at the Battle of Culloden, near Inverness, the following year in 1746. But a few centuries later, Scottish and English troops fought side by side during the First and Second World Wars, and here there stands a memorial which is dedicated to the men from Gretna Green who lost their lives in those conflicts. 65 names are engraved on the monument, a significant number given the size of this small border village. Even today, Gretna Green on its own is home to little more than a few hundred people, albeit in a busy corner of southwest Scotland. Taking a look at a map, here we can see exactly where you'll find Gretna Green. Quite literally a stone's throw away from the border with England, which is just over half a mile away on the nearby River Sark, with the English city of Carlisle just under 10 miles to the south. Indeed, Gretna Green's position on the border has long played a vital part in its history, and the village, once a tiny rural settlement, first found its feet when a new toll road was built through the area in the late 18th century, providing a direct connection for people travelling between England and Scotland. Initially, owners of local hotels and inns were the ones expecting to benefit, but shortly it appeared that Gretna Green, as the first easily reachable village over the border, was set to profit from an unusual series of events south of the border in England. Just here, we're walking up the path towards the grand old Gretna Hall Hotel, a beautiful building which was originally built in 1710 as a country house for the Johnston family, wealthy landowners in the area. But a couple of decades later, it became one of Gretna Green's most popular wedding venues, because over in England, the government introduced a new law, officially known as the Clandestine Marriages Act of 1753, which for the first time required people to have a formal ceremony in order to be legally married. Historically, while many marriages in England were indeed carried out in churches, it wasn't a legal requirement, and as such, many people were able to marry in secret through the centuries. However, with the introduction of this new act in the 1750s, people in England and Wales could no longer have a valid marriage without an official ceremony inside an Anglican church. And as such, there was no way to hide a controversial marriage should one need to. Except there was a way. In 1707, England and Scotland joined to form the Kingdom of Great Britain. But as part of the Acts of Union, not all new laws applied to both nations, and the Clandestine Marriages Act didn't apply here in Scotland. So the choice was simple. In England, marriages had to have an official ceremony and required parental consent for those under the age of 21 wishing to marry. In Scotland, though, boys from age 14 and girls from age 12 were able to marry without the approval of their parents, and there was no requirement for the ceremony to take place in an official venue. Young eloping couples with disapproving parents therefore made their way straight for the border, simply looking to get married under Scottish law in the first place that they could find. And thanks to that new toll road, Gretna Green here was for many exactly that. Some married inside Gretna's Old Hall, but many instead walked up the road to the local blacksmith's workshop, who was well known for conducting wedding ceremonies, where couples were married upon his striking of an anvil, just like the one that we find here. Now, because of these so-called anvil weddings, these weighty metal blocks have become an unlikely symbol of love in Britain's marriage capital here, a village whose name is also synonymous with runaway marriages. Because so many couples eloped to this village to get married, the concept of a Gretna Green marriage began to spread. But that didn't just have to be a marriage enacted here in Gretna Green. Plenty of other spots along the Anglo-Scottish border developed a healthy industry of Gretna Green marriages through the late 18th and early 19th centuries, with towns and villages including Coldstream, Lamberton, and more. But the scope of the trend was even wider than that. Some people from England and Wales instead travelled to the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea to get around English marriage law. Meanwhile, people from Ireland, which at the time was under English law, voyaged across the sea to the coastal village of Port Patrick, near Stranraer, in the very southwest of Scotland, to get their own Gretna Green marriages. For decades, hundreds and hundreds of couples managed to dodge the restrictions in order to finally tie the knot. But it was a loophole that sadly couldn't last forever. And we'll pick up the story of what happened when the authorities caught wind of what was going on here in Gretna Green a little later on. For now though, we're walking north away from the village green towards the old blacksmith shop, which we'll find just on the other side of the motorway here, which runs right through the middle of Gretna Green. This is the A74M, the road which, when it crosses over the border into England, becomes the M6 motorway, the longest motorway in the entire country, running for more than 230 miles from roughly this point all the way down to Leicestershire in the English Midlands. Admittedly, the underpass beneath the motorway here may not be the most scenic spot in Gretna Green, but it's a reminder of just how much traffic began passing through this part of Scotland when that toll road was built in the late 18th century, providing a modern connection through the western side of the country. Historically, the vast majority of people travelling between England and Scotland went up the country's east coast, from London through York and up to Edinburgh. But as the Industrial Revolution kicked into gear, many places in the west of England and Scotland, including Glasgow, Manchester and Birmingham, grew both in size and in importance. And as such, it was necessary to have equally strong connections along the west coast here as it was along the more historic east coast. Gretna Green, a rural village once known simply as Graitney, was a fortunate beneficiary of these wider developments. But even as new houses were built on the village streets, like those we can see just across the road here, this remained a very small settlement for a long time. But during the First World War, an entirely new town was built just on the other side of Gretna Green. Its name, slightly confusingly, was Gretna, and it was laid out in just 2 years to house thousands of people working in a nearby munitions factory, producing arms for use on the Western Front. Now today, the much larger town of Gretna, home to some 3,000 people, still exists about a 20-minute walk from where we are now. But it's little Gretna Green where you'll find the bulk of the local history. And of course, the history of Gretna Green would be nothing without the history of runaway marriages, the vast majority of which were conducted just across the road here at the village's world-famous Old Blacksmith shop. Originally built in 1713, this famous local landmark earnestly began life as a blacksmith's workshop, and it remained so for the best part of 100 years. But when young couples began crossing the border and walking into Scotland in the mid-18th century, this was for many the very first building that they happened to come across, and as such they would wander inside and ask the blacksmith if he could marry them. Under Scottish law, there was no reason why not, so the blacksmith began conducting very simple, speedy ceremonies, asking a couple if they were of marriageable age and if they were free to marry, that being not already married to someone else. With a quick yes from each of them and a clink on the blacksmith's anvil, they were legally married, in an efficient form of ceremony that soon became the bread and butter of this village. Now today, nearly 300 years after the first wedding ceremonies were conducted here, people still come to Gretna Green to get married. The old blacksmith shop is now part of a delightful little complex with 3 separate marriage rooms and plenty of lovely spots for wedding photos, beside elegant sculptures and historic buildings. As a wedding destination, Gretna Green is exceptionally popular today. Thousands of people get married here every year. And almost unbelievably, recent reports have even suggested that as many as 1 in 6 of all marriages in Scotland are conducted right here in Gretna Green. When marrying here, there are plenty of traditions and rites of passage to experience too. For instance, just here we find an archway decorated with metal horseshoes. It's known as the Lucky Arch, and for couples who stand beneath it on their wedding day, it's said to bring good luck for a long and happy marriage. Now, we know the story of how this once rural blacksmith shop came to be an unlikely wedding destination, and why so many people still come here to get married centuries later. But, as we mentioned, during Gretna Green's heyday as a runaway wedding destination, the authorities over the border in England were far from pleased at how easily people were managing to shirk their restrictions. The Clandestine Marriages Act came into force in 1754, but it wasn't until more than 100 years later, in 1857, that English authorities decided to do something about those coming to Gretna Green. That year, a new act was passed which meant that a marriage in Scotland would no longer be recognised in England, unless one of the bride or groom had been resident in Scotland for at least 21 days. This was of course a major inconvenience to those young couples who sought to quickly and secretly come and get married here, and it slightly slowed the influx of runaway lovers to this village throughout the second half of the 19th century. But even so, a Gretna Green marriage, now famous as a symbol of true love in the face of overbearing rules, still had a romantic appeal to so many, and hundreds of couples continued to flock to this village year after year until 1940, when finally the Scottish government outlawed so-called irregular marriages, marriages conducted by someone other than an official registrar or a member of the clergy. Instantly, Gretna Green's famous wedding industry was shut down, and the local blacksmith could no longer legally marry people. As we know though, that wasn't the end of the story, because the rules were gradually repealed to bring Gretna Green weddings back to life. In 1977, the 21-day residence rule was removed. In 1994, Anvil weddings outside of churches were permitted once again. and in 2002, official registrars were granted the right to perform wedding ceremonies in approved venues outside of official offices. And so that's where we find ourselves today. Gretna Green's old blacksmith shop, complete with a huge car park, is one of those approved venues, which draws in both tourists coming to explore the history, and of course plenty of wedding parties too. As we can see, it's a busy old venue, especially during the summer wedding season. But surrounding the old smithy and the wedding rooms, you'll find cafes, gift shops, and delightful surrounding grounds with many romantically themed attractions. Here on the other side of the car park, we find the rather lovely Wall of Love. Quite literally a wall of padlocks arranged in the form of the word love, which have been locked up by the many thousands of couples who've celebrated their wedding day here over the years. Indeed, with 1 in every 6 people in Scotland getting married here, the Wall of Love is very busy, packed to bursting point with the stories of thousands of happy couples from all over the country, and beyond. Plenty of English people, and those from overseas also come to get married here, or simply visit for a romantic day out. Just behind the Wall of Love, meanwhile, is a maze, known as the Courtship Maze. Laid out in the shape of 2 wedding bands, the maze has 2 separate entrances, and that's to encourage couples to enter the labyrinth separately, and to make their way through all of its twists and turns before reaching the centre together, symbolic of the journey through life towards marriage. And of course, for so many couples over the last 300 years, that journey has culminated right here in Gretna Green. But sadly, it's here in front of the Wall of Love that we've reached the end of our walk around this romantic border village. But just before we go, let's take a closer look at the Wall of Love, and give our best wishes to one of the happy couples who've got married here recently. Congratulations to Craig and Zoe, who were married on the 21st of August 2024. Best of luck for the years ahead.